This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
So have you ever seen someone on TV that you're just smitten with where you say, hey, I like that person. They have charisma. They have a glow. They have meaning. That's how I felt the first time I saw Raymond Arroyo on Laura Ingraham Angle, and I looked him up. I said, who is this fellow? He looks like Fred Astaire, who I love, great dancer. And he is a children's author, and suddenly the more we see him on TV and best-selling author, and suddenly now he's a household name. Raymond's waiting patiently to talk about his book, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, but then I found this online from the Library of Congress, and we'll play it first, and we'll talk about his advocacy for children's literacy, which is very endearing.
We have 21 million illiterate Americans among us. We can't let that happen. That is a national tragedy. And as a children's author, in fact, it was part of the reason I wanted to write for children, because that is the opportunity we have to get them addicted to story, to excite them about a literary adventure. And you have a very small window. And once that window closes, the statistics tell us it's very hard to get them, to turn them into readers and then to encourage reading down the line. So our job as children's authors is to make that story so alive and fun and exciting for kids that they want to come back for the next story. And we can't have millions and millions of our fellow Americans unable to read. They're cut off not only from our nation's story, but from their own story. We can't have that.
There you go. That's Raymond Arroyo, and he joins us right now, The Spider Who Saved Christmas. Raymond, thank you so much for calling into the program.
Hey, Tom. My pleasure. Delighted to be with you. And wow, I hadn't heard that in a long time. I remember that was when the Library of Congress has their big book festival every year, and they invited me in a few years ago, and they asked me, talk about children's illiteracy. So I went into my dance, and like Fred Astaire, and it was it's a great event. But it's it is a passion of mine, and I'm working on in addition to the picture book series that I've done for Sophia and the Spider Who Saved Christmas, I'm working on some other projects for kids, because I do think, and as I travel the nation and go to schools and talk to reading groups, you see the death of literacy in the country. And if you don't have a child reading by fourth grade, if they're not reading proficient at fourth grade, the outcomes are so terrible, Tom. I mean, incarceration, 80% incarceration rate, 80% welfare state, all of that kicks in if that child is not reading by fourth grade. It's an amazing correlation that we often overlook. We spend money on a lot of things. We should be spending much more money and time on children's literacy.
Hallelujah. Absolutely. And, EWTN, you're the lead anchor there. You work with Fox. You've written these books. A New Orleans kid. You grew up in Louisiana, did you not?
How did you get still there? I moved back.
Yeah, I was about to say, and I know you're a father and a happy husband, and you're a family guy and a person of faith, and those are all certainly endearing. Talk radio. I mean, we're up in the Pacific Northwest, headquartered in Alaska, with a pretty good swath of people. But there's some liberal states there. Alaska's not, but Washington and Oregon are. That talk radio at the local level is a big deal, because that's kind of the salt of the earth that follows folks like you and buys your books. Hence, you're on this show, because you probably never heard of my show, but we're so honored that you're with us. But you, at some point in your life, decided, hey, I want to write. When was that? Were you a kid? Were you an adult in college?
Well, I always wrote. I mean, I wrote from the time I was I found old, in fact, the other day I was cleaning out my mother's house, and I found little plays and comic strips and stories I'd written when I was a kid. So I've always written. And then, then I was in the theater for a number of years. I studied in New York with Stella Adler, who trained everybody from Marlon Brando to John, what's his name, the great comedian who was in Three's Company, Nate Ritter.
I was going to say John Ritter. Yep.
Yeah, and anyway, I loved the theater because you were telling stories, you were bringing stories to life, you were bringing humanity to people. And so I segued into news. I always loved news. But I never lost that desire to tell stories, and that's what I do every day. I tell fiction stories, I tell nonfiction stories. But when I had my own children, I read them all, the classics, had burned through them all, and I thought, what else is there for kids? And there's remarkably very little good, nourishing, eternal content being created that you'd want to read to the next generation. And I thought, well, I should try to do that. So I've devoted a part of my, writing life to writing for kids. And I think they're the most challenging audience, but they're a great audience. They're such, because a child takes a story right to heart. An adult holds it at length, at arm's length, but not a child. And when they use that, I have a reading initiative called Story-Ented. And what we do is bring authors into schools to excite kids about reading, because it's not enough to give them a book. You have to excite them and hook them onto the story, make them enter that world. And Story-Ented was named so because I think every story orients us in the world. It shows us our place in the world and how we fit in, how to make sense of it all. And I still think of stories that way. They are guides for living. They are warning signs for living. And, so it's a great privilege for me to write for families. And I consider all these books family reads. I write them for great-grandmothers. I write them for 5-year-olds. And, they're written on a couple of levels so that both audiences can enter in and come away with a slightly different experience, but they can enjoy something together and hopefully share the experience together.
We're talking with Raymond Arroyo. His book, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, a legend. We're going to get into this, but listen, I'm not going to make you blush. You're obviously a handsome guy. You're highly intelligent. Your cadence, your speech, you'd be a good voiceover. You speak well. You know these things, or you wouldn't be where you're at today. My question.
Well, I question your taste, Tom.
No, and this is true, and I'm sure the girls flutter their eyelashes at you and all the rest. You've got that star power. Here's the question, and I'm not setting you up for a joke. Have you thought about a TV show? And I don't mean in the Mr. Rogers style, because I don't think that's your style, and I don't think in the sophomoric style. I think in the literal, and again, it wouldn't be for 2-year-olds because you're too intellectual. It would be over their head, and you're not going to dumb it down. Have you thought of that though, where you have a show tied to this, or do you think there's not a market? Someone actually, because of another series I'm working on, they've talked about this. And we'll see. Wow. I mean, it's something that could be fun. Again, you have to have the right material, and children are also. I write a Will Wilder series, which is sort of my Harry Potter at Random House. Correct.
But the centerpiece of that series is Western antiquities. Okay, things these are artifacts you would really find in a museum, a church, a library, and they really exist in the world. And then I kind of pull out the supernatural, purported legendary abilities of these objects, and so that's the centerpiece. But they're very complex. They're really hard to write, because children are working on several levels, and you don't play down to a kid. You actually have to play up to a child, and I find them intensely hard to write. It takes a long time to script those out, and I probably have to take the same approach in TV, because they're so. By the time they're 5 years old, they've seen everything it took us 30 years to digest. They're on to every game. So you really have to be really sophisticated and shoot straight with a kid. So anything I do in that realm, that would be the guiding light.
Of course, and I'm putting my hands up for prayer that Raymond Arroyo can stay with us just a couple more minutes. We're going to jump into a break. You know how radio is, just like with TV. Absolutely. The Spider Who Saved Christmas, a legend. Folks, we are going to tell you how to purchase this. We're going to get into more of his books, and I want to ask a couple questions, and he can contemplate on the breaker. It's a really quick break. The questions are going to be tied to COVID and tied to with everybody, at least over the last year, stuck. Does Raymond think that book reading has increased, or has technology and games increased? Maybe it's both. And then when someone listens, and we'll touch on the aspiring writers out there, and if someone's listening and saying, I want to write, I want to find out how he got into the publication world and what it felt like. And Raymond, maybe we have 20 seconds or before to rate, but I mean, when you're a best-selling author and you get that golden sticker, how did that feel?
Well, it's extremely gratifying. It took a lot of work to get there. And I tell anybody, if you want to write, I always say, you want to write, grab a chair, sit in it. That's what you need to do. You have to sit and write. A lot of people write in their heads. You got to write.
No, we're going to come right back with him. Raymond Arroyo, great advice. We'll talk more about the spider who saved Christmas. Perfect timing. Christmas is coming. Stay with us. Tom Anderson Show.
This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Well, you think of Sarah Palin, people we've had on, Ted Nugent, recently U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, Dan Bongino, Dan Crenshaw from Texas, all these politicians, and we get into some really meat and potatoes, American ethos, where we're going, patriotism. Then you get some folks that come on that are of equal stature, but that say, hey, let's not look at it at the macro level. Let's look at it at a micro level. Let's look at it at the foundation, the rudiments, our children. And let's look at how they're taught, what they're doing. One of the biggest tools Raymond Arroyo says we can give them is the ability to read and then something to read. And he's written The Spider Who Saved Christmas, a legend. And he has written so much we're going to get into, and we're going to make a YouTube video of this one. That's why we have the stock music, so we can get it out there. And we are going to show you the link so that you can purchase these. And he called in because he really wants you to buy this and look. And Raymond, also, it's a good gift. These are not expensive. $17, $20. Someone could buy 5 of them and give them as gifts.
Well, Tom, the thing that when I was traveling years ago in Eastern Europe, I was in Ukraine, and I noticed on the tree, it was during Christmastide or Advent, and there were Christmas trees around, and all the trees were decked out in the most tinsel I'd ever seen in my life. It was like a tinsel truck turned over and dumped on this tree. But in the branches, there were little spider ornaments, like jeweled spider ornaments. And I thought, what is this about? And I thought in my stupidity, they just recycled Halloween ornaments and put them in the trees, I guess. Sure. I don't know. So I just kept moving. I didn't think about it. Years later, I'm researching another book, and in one of these huge Bible commentaries, like these 4,000-page monsters, I find a footnote, and it says, there is an ancient legend that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus hid in a cave on their way to Egypt, and they were assisted by a spider. That's all it said. Very tiny footnote, 2 sentences maybe. Well, I started researching this, and turns out there is this ancient legend from the 2nd century, and popes have written about it, saints have written about it, St. John Chrysostom and others write about it. So it's a really ancient tale. And I dug it up. I refashioned my own version of it. Now, you had to expand some things, create a few cliffhangers here and there.
Of course.
But it is really about, it fills in this little gap in the story. But what I loved about it is, the reason we turned it into a picture book and not a chapter book or a short story is because I wanted families to experience it together, because it refocuses us on the reality of Christmas. And the reality of Christmas is not snowflakes and frosties and reindeer and gift giving. The centrality of the season is a mystery. And that mystery is God made man, that God came in a human form and was among us, and the dangers that presented to this God-child, and the dangers that this family went through. And we don't often think about that at Christmas, but, as it turned out, and again, I really write when I'm inspired to write, and the things I'm inspired to write. I think, I'm not the author of any of that. I think that's, other hands, a divine hand. The timing of it I couldn't have predicted, because we're all like that family, Tom. We're all on the run. We're hiding with our families in caves, trying to avoid sudden death, as we have through this COVID nightmare. Worried about the death that's just outside the door. And in that darkness, in that despair, in that fear, this family finds not only hope, but salvation, love, protection. And it comes from a creature they never imagined, this forgotten, even creature of fright that early in the story, Joseph raises his staff. He wants to kill this big spider, because wouldn't you do that if a spider's near your child?
Absolutely.
But it's an interesting way the tale unfolds, and as Mary says at some point in the book, all are here for a reason, and that ends up being the central point of the story. I think it's the center point of the season of Christmas, and I also think it's why so many people have been attracted to the Spider Who Saved Christmas, because it's a way in for families and children to that mystery of the divine providence of God in confusion, in darkness, and that's where the true light of this season exists. It's in God's hand here in this moment, and you have to be looking for those blessings, those miracles, in unconventional places, and they come at times in unconventional ways, and that I do think that's the way of God.
New York Times best-selling author Raymond Arroyo talking about his book, his latest book, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, A Legend. Let's talk quickly about how they can order it. And before you get into the nitty-gritty, because, by the way, while you were talking, I slipped in and bought some books, and I'm listening to. Isn't it neat that we can multitask? And I'm going to give him his gifts. My son's too old, but I have other and I have a granddaughter, so I'm going to send to them. But let me ask, who is the artist? Because that helps too, doesn't it? You could have made a scary
Randy
spider.
Gallegos.
Yep, and you didn't.
Yes. Randy Gallegos is the illustrator, and we worked a long time. I wanted this to be very dramatic, so the spreads are really dramatic, and they build on each other as they're supposed to, and there are a lot of cliffhangers in the book. But he did a beautiful job, and Randy only paints by hand. I've never worked with an illustrator who painted oil, and that's what he does.
You can tell when you look, folks. Yeah, you can tell it's beautiful art. Really closely.
Yeah, you can see the canvas and the strokes there. But I was sort of amazed by his art, and we wanted those rich colors, and it feels like a classic old book the way it's illustrated, and I wanted it to have that feel because the story is of ancient vintage. But I've been amazed by the families who've been touched by it. I mean, I've got 80-year-olds reading it. I've got 5-year-olds reading it.
Yeah, I'm keeping one. I ordered more than one, and I'm keeping one. Hey, by the way, the publisher, a shout out to them, is Sophia Institute Press. Is that one way to buy it, or is that the publisher?
No, you can go to Amazon. Go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. Barnes & Noble and the local independent booksellers have been such great supporters of this book. We were 5 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list last Christmas. So it found a huge audience. And I think, when a story resonates, you just kind of feel it. And I mean, the mail I get and the emails I get about this story has been incredible. So, that's why I'm going on a little book tour. They can go to RaymondArroyo.com. And on my website, I have, unfortunately, I'm not coming to Anchorage, but maybe someday soon. I'm in Tampa, Florida. I'm in Arizona. I'm in Texas and New Orleans. So we're doing kind of a south, tour through the south. And maybe next year I can get a little further north. But
no, absolutely. Well, we very much appreciate it. Bless you for your efforts and for all you do. And, folks, I'm going to put on his website all the ways you can connect with him. And the key is you can write to him and say, thanks, heard your interview. But the best thing is to buy that book and to pass it out and buy more than one because it makes sense as a gift. And I know you're obviously the author, so you're smitten towards it yourself. But I really think that this is a great gift, especially this year with all the stuff going on.
You're right. And Tom, I think the most important thing, I mean, I hope people, buy the book, but more importantly, I hope they take the time, sit with the children in your life and the young people in your life and share the story with them, because together you will come away with an experience that I couldn't have given you if you just read the book. That moment, that interaction, is so important because it teaches kids a love of stories and a love of storytelling. And, as I was telling you during the break, if a child can't read by 4th grade, we are talking about juvenile incarceration in the 80th percentile. And that's not just, isn't that a sad statistic? No, that costs you and me, the taxpayer, $25,000 for an adult incarcerated individual, $50,000 for a juvenile every year of their life. So that time spent reading to a child, sharing a story, or reading to a group of children, if you can volunteer to do so, that is time so well spent. So
well said. Well said, my friend. It is a real gift. Raymond Arroyo, thank you so much. The Spider Who Saved Christmas. Look below on this YouTube video, and you will see how to purchase it. Thank you, my friend. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Tom. You made my day. And Merry Christmas. Let's talk soon.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas. Raymond Arroyo, what a pleasure. What a pleasure to have authors of his stature on this show. Spider Who Saved Christmas. I just told you I'm buying a few of those, and I'm going to pass them out to my peeps with kiddos. Read books to your kids. That matters. Literacy matters. Stay with us. Tom Anderson Show.